The moment my son stepped into my house that Thanksgiving, he finally realized how cold my life had become. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Helen Whitmore. I was 72 years old that Thanksgiving morning, and I woke before sunrise because the cold would not let me sleep anymore. The old digital clock beside my bed blinked 5:12 a.m. in faint blue numbers. I remember staring at it through the dimness, wrapped in 3 blankets, listening for the sound that never came. No hum from the furnace, no warm air pushing through the vents, only November wind slipping through the tiny gaps around my bedroom window and rattling the siding outside. The thermometer on my dresser read 48 degrees. I looked at it for a long time before reaching for the thick wool cardigan hanging over the chair. It had belonged to my husband, Walter. Even after 12 years without him, I still wore it every winter morning like armor. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. Even after Walter passed, I kept the same traditions. Turkey, sweet potatoes with marshmallows, green bean casserole, homemade cranberry sauce my son Daniel used to sneak from the fridge when he was little. Back then, he would grin at me with cranberry stains on his cheeks. That morning, the memory hurt more than it comforted me. I stepped carefully onto the hardwood floor, my knees aching from the cold. Downstairs, the kitchen was even colder than the bedroom. My breath fogged lightly in the air as I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. The burner clicked twice before the small blue flame appeared. I held my hands near it, just for a second, just to feel something warm. Outside, frost covered the lawns across the street. Porch lights glowed softly in the gray morning. Somewhere in that same city, families were waking up in warm houses, turning on football, arguing over pies, laughing over coffee. In my house, the silence felt heavy enough to touch. The furnace had stopped working in September. At first, I told myself I could manage. September was mild. October was uncomfortable. By November, the cold had settled into the walls like it belonged there. The repair estimate had been nearly $6,000. I still remembered sitting at the kitchen table with the paper in my hand, while the technician explained financing options. He was kind about it. That almost made it worse. $6,000 might not have sounded impossible to my son. Daniel Whitmore owned luxury apartment buildings in downtown Chicago. His company had been written about in business magazines. He drove a black Range Rover and wore watches that cost more than my mortgage payment. But I had never asked him for money. Not once. I had spent my life protecting my son from hardship, and somehow even at 72 I still could not stop. By 8 o'clock, the turkey was prepared, the vegetables were chopped, and I had taped cardboard again over the hallway vent because cold air kept blowing backward into the dining room when the wind picked up. Then headlights flashed through the front curtains. Daniel had arrived early. My heart gave a small foolish lift. I straightened my sweater, smoothed my hair, and glanced once at the thermostat. 50 degrees. Before opening the door, I quietly turned it off completely. Vanessa stepped in first. My daughter-in-law wore a cream wool coat, leather gloves, and the kind of perfume that made my little hallway smell like a department store. She leaned in for a quick hug, barely touching me. "Happy Thanksgiving, Helen," she said brightly. Then she rubbed her hands together. "Wow, it is freezing outside today." I smiled. "Come in before all the cold follows you." Daniel came behind her carrying insulated catering bags from a downtown restaurant. At 44, he still had the same brown eyes he had as a boy, but lately there was always a distracted look behind them. "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek, "you should have let us host this year." "Oh no, sweetheart," I said. "Thanksgiving belongs in this house." Then Sophie ran in. My granddaughter was 10 with long blonde hair, fuzzy boots, and a bright pink hat. She wrapped her arms around my waist like she meant it. "Grandma!" For the first time that morning I smiled. Without forcing it. Daniel carried food to the kitchen while Vanessa looked around my living room. Her eyes paused on the old wallpaper near the dining room. She did not say anything, but I had known Vanessa long enough to hear what she did not say. Old. Outdated. Embarrassing in photographs. She had brought crystal wine glasses from home because, as she once put it, my mismatched glasses didn't photograph well for holiday memories. Holiday memories. That was what Vanessa called pictures. I called them proof that people had been present. Daniel loosened his scarf and glanced around. Mom, where's your thermostat? I froze for half a second. Oh, that old thing acts up sometimes, I said. I just keep it low. You should replace it, he said. Then his phone buzzed. Just like that, I lost him again. He stepped into the hallway, already answering a business call. Vanessa unpacked trays on the counter. He never stops working, she said. One of his investors is flying in from New York tomorrow. He always worked hard, I said. Vanessa smiled without warmth. Sometimes I think he works too hard for everybody else. I knew what she meant. Vanessa measured generosity like an expense report. Every favor had a cost. Every family obligation had a hidden invoice. Sophie wandered toward the dining room vent and crouched beside the cardboard. Grandma, she asked, why is this covered? I walked over too quickly. That vent makes funny noises. She touched the cardboard. But it's cold air. Vanessa looked up. Helen, are you sure you're warm enough in here? For one dangerous second, I almost told the truth. The heater broke. I sleep in gloves. Some nights I can see my breath upstairs. But Daniel was still pacing in my hallway, discussing contracts worth millions, and the old instinct closed over my throat. I'm perfectly fine, I said. Vanessa nodded and went back to arranging pies. Nobody looked closely enough to doubt me. Not yet. By noon, the house smelled like Thanksgiving, but even roasted turkey and cinnamon could not hide the cold. I carried dishes slowly because my hands had started trembling. Daniel stood near the kitchen island answering emails. Vanessa arranged napkins beside plates. Sophie sat by the window watching snow begin to fall. Grandma, she said softly, it looks pretty outside. It always does at first, I said. That was the truth about snow in Illinois. First it looks like a postcard. Then it becomes work. Then danger. Then a bill you are afraid to open. Daniel finally slipped his phone away and looked at me. Mom, why are you wearing your vest inside? I looked down. I had forgotten to take it off. Oh, I said, giving a small laugh. I was bringing groceries in earlier. Vanessa opened the wine bottle. Helen has always been cold. Remember Florida last Christmas? She wore gloves on the beach. Everyone chuckled lightly. I did not. The truth was simple. I had not been warm in months. During dinner, Daniel kept glancing around the house. First, I hoped I was imagining it. Then the pipes knocked inside the wall. He frowned. Did you hear that? Hear what? Another hollow sound echoed through the floorboards. Your furnace sounds strange. It's an old house, I said quickly. Everything sounds strange. Vanessa cut in. Daniel, can we not turn Thanksgiving into a home inspection? Sophie looked up from her mashed potatoes. Grandma says upstairs gets really cold at night. My stomach tightened. Sophie, Vanessa said softly, eat your dinner. Daniel's eyes sharpened. How cold? Oh, not that cold, I said. Sophie answered before I could stop her. Last time I visited, Grandma slept with gloves on. Silence. Even Vanessa stopped moving. Daniel stared at me. What? I reached for my water glass. It was one night. Mom, he said slowly, is your furnace broken? I opened my mouth, closed it. The wind struck the dining room windows hard enough to make the glass tremble. Since September, I said. Daniel blinked. September. It was still warm then. You've been living here without heat for over 2 months? Vanessa leaned back, irritation already appearing beneath her polished face. Helen, why would you not tell us? I looked down at my plate. Everybody has their own lives. Daniel pushed back his chair. No, he said. This is not normal. He walked to the thermostat. Press buttons. Nothing happened. Then he saw the taped vent. The cardboard suddenly looked like evidence. Without another word, he opened the basement door. A wave of freezing air rose from below. I stood too quickly. Daniel, don't worry about it tonight. It's Thanksgiving. But he was already going downstairs. The basement was colder than the rest of the house. I did not need to follow him to know what he would find. The dead furnace. The old space heater near the laundry sink. The towels wrapped around pipes. The blankets I had shoved under the basement door. The unpaid gas bill folded inside an old church envelope on the shelf. For a long moment, there was only silence from below. Then Daniel's voice came up the stairs. Mom. Not loud. Not angry. That made it worse. How long have you really been living like this? When he came back upstairs, his face had changed. The distracted businessman was gone. In his place stood my son. Not the man with buildings and investors and a Range Rover. My boy. The one I used to tuck under quilts during winter storms. The furnace is completely dead, he said. I know. Why didn't you call someone? I did. And the estimate was too high. How high? I looked away. Almost 6,000. Daniel let out a breath.
$6,000.
The number sounded different in his mouth. Small. Almost ridiculous. That hurt in a way I had not expected. Vanessa crossed her arms. Helen, nobody wants you living like this. I looked at her. Maybe not intentionally. The room went very still. Daniel turned. What does that mean? Nothing. But it was not nothing. A few months earlier I had almost called him. I had sat with the repair estimate beside the phone and dialed the first 3 numbers. Then I remembered Vanessa at dinner 2 weeks before, saying property taxes had gone up, Sophie's tuition was no joke, and successful people were always expected to rescue relatives who failed to plan. She had not said my name. She had not needed to. So I hung up. Now Daniel was looking between us. Mom. I folded my hands. I almost called you after the furnace stopped working. But Vanessa had mentioned expenses were tight with school and taxes. Didn't want to add to that. Vanessa's face tightened. That was not about this. I know, I said. You didn't mean anything by it. But Daniel kept looking at her. Vanessa let out a sharp breath. Oh, come on. Are we seriously doing this right now? I stepped in quickly. Please. This is not anybody's fault. Daniel looked at me. So instead of asking for help, you sat here freezing? I raised you to build a good life, Daniel. Not to spend your days worrying about me. You are my mother. And you were finally happy, I whispered. I didn't want to become another problem you had to solve. That sentence landed harder than I meant it to. Sophie lowered her eyes. Vanessa said nothing. Daniel stood very still. And I saw the realization begin. My son had been protected from hardship so well that he no longer recognized it when it returned to me. The worst humiliation in a family is rarely loud. It is not always someone shouting. Sometimes it is being spoken over. Sometimes it is hearing your daughter-in-law say, Helen doesn't really need much, while you are standing right there. Sometimes it is watching your old serving dishes moved aside because they do not match the holiday photos. Sometimes it is realizing your chair at the table has slowly become the least important one. That Thanksgiving, everything I had swallowed quietly began rising into the room. Daniel asked Vanessa, Did you know anything about this? What? About the furnace? No. But you knew this house was getting worse. Vanessa's eyes hardened. Daniel, your mother refuses help. She always has. I looked down. There was truth in that. That was what made it complicated. Manipulation works best when it hides inside something partly true. Vanessa continued. We offered her the guest house last winter. She said no. We mentioned a condo in Naples. She said no. What exactly are we supposed to do? This is my home, I said softly. Your father built this life with me. Daniel looked at me. Mom, home is not supposed to hurt you. That broke something quiet inside me. Sophie slid down from her chair and walked to the living room. When she came back, she carried her pink blanket. Without a word, she draped it around my shoulders. A child noticed. That was the moment Daniel truly understood. His 10-year-old daughter had seen my suffering before he had. Vanessa looked away. I think even she knew the image could not be explained away. An old woman at her own Thanksgiving table, wrapped in a child's blanket, inside a house with no heat. Later that evening, while Vanessa cleaned dishes too loudly in the kitchen and Sophie dozed near the fireplace, Daniel stayed with me at the dining table. The food had gone cold hours ago. So had the coffee. Snow covered the street outside until the whole neighborhood looked erased. Daniel rubbed his face. I should have seen this. You were building your future. And what about yours? The question surprised me. At my age, people do not ask about your future very often. They ask whether you took your medication, whether you need a ride, whether you remembered where you put your glasses, but not what you still want. I don't think much about that anymore, I said. Daniel shook his head. That's the problem. I looked toward the hallway, toward the drawer where Walter's paper still sat in a blue folder. There was something I had not told Daniel. Not because I wanted to hide it, because I had not known what it meant until recently. After Walter died, our attorney had sent me copies of the trust documents. The house was mine, fully mine. Walter had made that clear. But 3 months earlier, Vanessa had mentioned estate planning over Sunday coffee. She said it casually while slicing pound cake. You know, Helen, at some point Daniel will need to be able to manage things smoothly. It would be terrible if the house got tied up later. Then she left a brochure for a legal service on my counter. A week after that, Daniel sent me a text. Vanessa said you might want help organizing the house paperwork. We can talk soon. But we never did. Because he got busy. Because I did not want to bother him. Because Vanessa began asking little questions. Where was the deed? Had I updated my will? Wouldn't it be easier if Daniel were added just for convenience? That night, after the furnace truth came out, I walked slowly to the drawer and took out the blue folder. Daniel watched me. What is that? Your father's trust. Vanessa stopped washing dishes. The silence changed. I opened the folder. Walter left this house to me. Not to you. Not to anyone else. To me. Daniel frowned. I know that. Vanessa dried her hands carefully. Nobody said otherwise. I looked at her. No. Not directly. Her face went still. And for the first time I understood. The cold house was only part of it. The real betrayal was how slowly I had been made to feel like a guest in my own life. Vanessa did not shout. That would have been easier. Instead, she used her calm voice. Helen, I think you're misunderstanding concern as control. I nodded. I thought that too for a while. Daniel looked between us. What are you talking about? I kept my voice steady. Your wife has been asking about the deed, the will, whether my house should be transferred sooner rather than later. Vanessa laughed once. That is absurd. I was trying to help. You told me probate destroys families. It can. You told me old houses become burdens. They do. You told me widows sometimes make emotional decisions. Vanessa's face tightened. Daniel turned to her. You said that. She looked annoyed now. Daniel, I was talking generally. But I had spent years listening to what people meant beneath what they said. Walter used to say silence has fingerprints. Vanessa's were everywhere. Not in one cruel act. In dozens of small ones. Suggesting family trips without me. Telling Daniel I preferred quiet holidays. Saying I was too tired before anyone asked me. Bringing her own glasses. Moving my serving dishes aside. Laughing when I wore gloves indoors. Calling my house charming in the same tone someone uses for a museum. Daniel's jaw tightened. Vanessa. She looked at him. Do not make me the villain because your mother never learned to ask for help. I felt that one. Because again, part of it was true. I had not asked. But there is a difference between silence and consent. There is a difference between pride and being slowly trained not to need anything. Sophie woke near the fireplace and looked around sleepily. Are we fighting? Nobody answered. That was answer enough. By 9 o'clock the roads were bad. Snow pressed against the windows, and the house creaked in the wind. I told them they should stay. Daniel said. Not unless this house gets heat first. I smiled faintly. It survived this long. That's exactly the problem. Vanessa stood near the doorway, arms folded. She had stopped pretending to be cheerful. Her polished mask had not disappeared. But it had cracked enough for me to see the impatience beneath it. Helen, she said, what do you want from us? The question was not gentle. Sounded like accusation. For years I would have softened myself. I would have said nothing. I would have made tea. I would have told everyone it was fine. But something about the cold, the folder, Sophie's blanket, and Daniel's face made me too tired to lie. I want to stop being treated like an inconvenience, I said. The room went silent. Vanessa looked stunned not because the sentence was cruel, But because I had said it out loud, Daniel lowered his eyes. I continued quietly. I want people to stop deciding what I can handle without asking me. I want my son to call me before he believes I'm too tired, too stubborn, too old, or too difficult. I want my home to be respected even if it does not look good in photographs. Vanessa's mouth tightened. And I want my paperwork left alone. That landed. Daniel looked at her again. Vanessa whispered, "This is ridiculous." But her voice had lost strength. I folded the trust documents and placed them back in the folder. "I'm going to call Martin Reynolds on Monday," I said. Daniel looked up. "Dad's attorney?" "Yes." "For what?" "To make sure everything is updated clearly. My house, my accounts, my medical decisions. All of it." Vanessa said nothing. But I saw it. The brief flash of panic. Not dramatic. Not obvious. But real. And that was when I knew my quiet decision had reached the right place. The furnace was repaired 2 days later. Daniel sent people before sunrise. By afternoon, warm air moved through the vents again. The house felt different. But I did not. That is something people misunderstand about neglect. One repair does not erase months of sleeping in gloves. One apology does not erase years of being slowly pushed to the edge of your own family. Daniel called constantly after that. Sometimes twice a day. He hired contractors to replace windows, repair insulation, check pipes, update wiring. He wanted to fix everything he could touch. But the deeper things had no invoice. Vanessa came by once in December with a poinsettia and a careful apology. "I'm sorry if I made you feel dismissed," she said. That tiny word sat between us. I accepted the plant, not the excuse. Sophie visited often. She brought drawings from my refrigerator and asked if I was warm enough every time she came through the door. Children remember what adults try to move past. By January, the house was warmer than it had been in years. But warm walls do not automatically heal cold years. I began waking in the middle of the night, not from the cold anymore, but from the quiet. Walter's side of the bed remained empty. The hallway remained still. The rooms held memories, but memories had started to feel like furniture. I kept dusting for someone who was never coming home. One morning I stood in the living room with a cup of tea and looked at the mantel. Daniel at 7 in the snow. Walter in his work jacket. Sophie as a baby in my arms. I loved that house. But I finally understood something. I had confused staying with being loyal. And loneliness with devotion. In early spring I called a realtor. Not Daniel. Not Vanessa. A realtor. Her name was Marcy. She was kind, practical, and did not speak to me like I was fragile. When she walked through the house she noticed the old woodwork, the deep porch, the strong bones. "This place has been loved," she said. I nearly cried because she was right. It had been loved. That was why leaving hurt. When Daniel found out, he came over immediately. "Mom, you don't have to sell. We fixed everything." I folded Walter's old flannel shirt into a donation box. "I know. Then why?" I looked around the living room one last time. Because fixing the house didn't give me back a life. He stood there quietly. That was the hardest part for him. He wanted one clear problem. A broken furnace. A repair bill. A villain. But aging is not that simple. Family neglect is not that simple. Grief is not that simple. I touched his arm. "I am not doing this to punish you." His eyes filled. "It feels like I failed you." "You were distracted," I said. "That is different. But it still hurt." He nodded because he knew I was telling the truth. Vanessa did not come that day. Later, Daniel admitted she was angry. "She thinks you're overreacting," he said. I smiled sadly. "I imagine she does." Then I told him something that changed our family permanently. "I've updated my documents. Martin helped me." Daniel looked nervous. "Okay. You are still my son. I love you. But you are not my power of attorney anymore." His face tightened with pain. I continued gently. "I chose someone neutral. Someone who will follow my wishes without being pulled between guilt, marriage, and convenience." He looked down. For a moment I saw the boy he used to be. Then he whispered, "I understand." And I believed he did. I moved into a senior living community 30 minutes outside Chicago. It was not fancy, but it was warm. That mattered more than people think. My apartment had large sunny windows, beige carpet, and a small kitchen just big enough for soup, tea, and Sophie's cookie experiments. The first week, a woman named Carol knocked on my door. "We're having coffee downstairs," she said. "You coming?" I almost said no. Old habits. Then I said yes. That one word changed more than I expected. I joined the gardening club. I went to Thursday movie nights. I learned which neighbors played cards too seriously and which ones saved seats at breakfast. For the first time in years, I stopped eating dinner alone every night. Daniel visited every Sunday at first, then every other Sunday, then in a rhythm that felt less like guilt and more like choice. Vanessa came sometimes. Our relationship did not magically heal. She was polite. I was polite, but politeness no longer controlled me. When she made small comments, I no longer swallowed them whole. Once she looked around my apartment and said, "It's smaller than I expected." I smiled. "Yes," I said. "That's why I can fill it myself." She had no answer. That was enough. Nearly a year. After that Thanksgiving, snow fell again. Daniel arrived with groceries and flowers. Sophie ran ahead down the hallway. "Grandma!" She hugged me so tightly I laughed. My apartment smelled like cinnamon tea and chicken soup. Outside, snow drifted across the parking lot, but inside everything was warm. Truly warm. Daniel stood near the doorway taking it in. The lamplight. The blanket on the couch. The photographs I had chosen to bring. Not all of them. Only the ones that still felt honest. "You look happy here," he said. "I am." He lowered his eyes. "I still think about that night." "So do I." I can't believe I didn't see it. I walked over and touched his cheek the way I had when he was a little boy. "People don't notice loneliness all at once, Daniel." His eyes filled. "It happens slowly," I said. "One missed visit at a time. One rushed call. One holiday where someone assumes you're fine because you always say you are." He nodded. "I'm sorry, Mom." I know. I did not say it was all right, because it had not been. And I did not say everything was forgiven, because forgiveness, real forgiveness, is not a sentence people owe each other at the end of a painful story. It is a road. Some people walk it. Some only stand at the beginning. Sophie laughed from the kitchen, caught with 2 cookies in her hand. Daniel turned toward the sound, then back to me. For once, his phone stayed in his pocket. Outside, the winter storm moved quietly across the city. But I was not afraid of the cold anymore. I sat by my window with a warm blanket around my shoulders, watching snow fall over a life I had finally chosen for myself. Not because my family gave me permission, not because anyone rescued me, but because one Thanksgiving night, inside a freezing house, I finally stopped protecting everyone from the truth. And the truth, painful as it was, gave me back my dignity.